I used to finish my woodworking projects and think to myself, why does this look like this was done in shop class instead of a pro build? Well, here are the things I learned that instantly leveled up my work. Beginners sand unevenly. There's a lot of techniques that you kind of have to learn along the way to improve this. I remember when I first started out, I always got swirl marks or dark patches or leftover glue. One of the best things I ever learned is that you have to work through the grit progression. Depending on the finish, you end in a different spot, but I always try to start with 80 and work my way up through the grits. So usually something like 80, 120, 180, 220. That just makes sure that you knock down all the different levels of roughness. You'll be knocking down all the high spots first and getting it really close, and that will sort of make your project flat. But then after that, you start to get a little bit finer finish. You have to be careful though, because some finishes don't want to be that fine and smooth. Some need a little bit more to grab onto. So make sure that you follow whatever the manufacturer says about the finish you plan to use. One of the big tricks that I learned was to take a pencil and scribble all over your workpiece. That will just ensure that you've A, sanded everywhere that needs to be sanded, and B, that you've sanded enough. Keep sanding until the pencil marks are gone, and you should be good. Sanding is the first step to finishing, and if you don't do a good job sanding, your finish is going to look terrible. Sanding takes a lot longer than you think, and it can be boring. So get yourself a really good set of headphones and just rock out and sand on. Another thing that I learned that was an absolute game changer was sanding each of my pieces individually before I do any assembly. I'll get most of the sanding completely out of the way on each of the pieces so they're basically perfect, and then I'll assemble everything together and then do one more final sanding. I always joke that when you think you're done sanding, you're probably about half done. Before you even make your first cut, measuring and marking is the most important thing. You have to measure precisely because that's your best chance to get everything perfect nominally. Because after that, the mistakes just start to compound on top of each other. So you want to give yourself the best possible chance at a perfectly finished project. If you just say that's good enough, then you're going to end up with gaps, misalignment, and out of square projects. It's important to think about how you're marking. If it's something that's super important, you might want to use a marking knife instead of a pencil. A pencil's a lot thicker than a marking knife, and even just that little bit of extra thickness can really add to the inaccuracy of your final project. And this could even add maybe like a 32nd of an inch, and you keep adding those and compounding those, and before you know it, it's way off. Another thing you learn when you first start getting into woodworking is that which side of the line you cut on matters. And I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally cut on the wrong side and my project was completely ruined. The curve of the blade is a lot thicker than you think, and it has to be considered when making your cuts. But ultimately, repeatability and accuracy beats out expensive tools any day of the week. Another thing to consider is changing in temperature. If you're working out in a 95-degree garage and you plan to bring your project into a nicely AC 70-degree room, things are going to move, things are going to change, and you need to account for that. Ultimately, when I'm building something that needs to be super accurate, I'll bring my boards in and have them acclimated to the temperature of the space that they're going to be in when the project is done. And then I'll head out to my shop and work on it. Yes, they will start to change temperature as I'm working on them out in the shop, but it's going to be a lot closer than if I were to just leave them in the shop and have them acclimating at a much different temperature. Right now out in my garage, it's like 39 degrees. And if I worked on something and then brought it inside, it's going to grow. So that's just something to consider. Wood grain is also critical. Say this is a board. A board's going to grow a lot more in this direction than in this direction. So when you're building anything, you need to take that into account. And I'm going to share a story that I'm embarrassed about. You may have already heard this story, but I'm going to share it again. I built a farmhouse table when I lived in Auburn, Alabama. And I built it in a 90-degree garage. And when I built it, I decided I was going to use breadboard ends. I always make the mistake of trying something that's a little bit beyond my skill level right out of the box. And sometimes I fail when I do that. But when I fail, I learn a lot. So that's okay. So anyway, I built this table with breadboard ends, and I even decided to get really fancy and put a perpendicular board in the middle of the table. Well, I went ahead and glued everything together, and I didn't think about wood expansion at all. And somehow that table was actually okay for about 4 years in Alabama. Then we moved to Wisconsin, and the table showed up and had a huge crack down the middle. And I was devastated because I loved this table. It was made from wood that had been sitting on a shelf since 1980. It was my first real woodworking project, and it was meant to be a family dining room table that was going to last us forever. So I lived with it that way for a few years, and then during that time I learned about wood movement, and I figured out why it cracked. It's because the breadboard ends were expanding a lot more than the glued up panels in the middle. So they pulled on the glued up panels until something had to give, and it was the wood, not the glue, and it split right down the middle. So I got myself some white oak to replace the boards that cracked. I took the table and I cut it all apart on my table saw, and then I rebuilt the table using dowels for the breadboard ends. And I have had that table that way for about 5 years. Haven't had a problem ever since. As I start to talk about this, I think about my own setup. I have a single stall garage, nothing fancy. I have some nice tools, but some are just basic tools. And I do what I can with what I have. And if you want to see my setup, head over to my other channel, How I Do Things Woodworking, and subscribe. You'll see that my setup is nothing special. It's a setup that I think most people could have if they want to get into woodworking. And I think I like it that way because I don't ever want to be a woodworking channel that has an unachievable workshop, because it'll make people believe that they can't get to that level. I want my channel to be achievable for people. So head over and check it out. If you head over there, you will see that I do focus more on technique, setup, and I try to be patient, but I'm known to be an impatient person. So I think you'll see that on my channel. I think that's realistic too. I have a family and I'm busy, and every second seems to count no matter what I'm doing. So I'm always scrambling, but every now and then I just have to take a deep breath and remember, be patient. Focus on the thing you're working on right now, because you can't do everything all at once. But an example would be a chisel. A sharp $40 chisel will beat a dull $200 chisel any day of the week. So you might want to focus more on learning how to sharpen a chisel instead of just buying an expensive one. Even if you put weeks into a project and then rush the finish or put a really cheap finish on a project, it's going to look terrible. This is where we come back to the sanding part. Start by sanding properly. Spend enough time sanding, work your way through the grits. Make sure you've read the manufacturer's instruction so you know you're sanding to the right grit. If your finish doesn't say anything, 220 grit is usually a safe bet. Also make sure you've selected the right type of finish for your project. There's so many different types: wipe-on oils, shellacs, hard wax, poly. I've tried just about every type of finish out there. If you're having trouble figuring out what finish to use, cut a couple of scrap pieces from the wood you plan to use for your project. Then try out the different finishes you're thinking about using on those pieces of wood, and then make your decision. When I first started woodworking, I didn't know what to do for a finish. I was looking for kind of like a barnwood finish on some new pine, so I wanted to age it and make it look naturally old, which is actually kind of a hard thing to do. So I used the old vinegar and steel wool technique. I don't know if any of you have ever tried that. It's kind of interesting. But I was looking for kind of a grade aged finish, and it ended up being really warm, and I hated it. But I lived with it for a few years, and then I tried another idea that I had, which was to stain it really dark, like a dark brown walnut color, and then come back and gray wash the entire thing with like a acrylic paint and water, and then apply a wax on top of that. It ended up being a pretty cool finish. I wouldn't say it was an aged barnwood look like I was going for, but it turned out okay. And I learned a lot. I learned what looks cool. I actually have a table that's stained that way now, and I still love it. But my favorite finish is Rubio Monocoat. If you haven't ever used it, I highly recommend trying it. It is very expensive. They use it on hardwood floors, and it can be very, very durable, and it comes in a lot of different colors. What I really like about it is it's very subtle and it maintains the grain and basic texture of the wood. It just adds a little something to it. Now I use the more natural ones, but there are darker ones that can change the color a lot. Either way, Rubio Monocoat, it's pretty awesome. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do like it. I've bought a lot of it. I've spent a lot of money on it, and I would suggest that. In my mind, if you're gonna spend money on anything, I'd rather spend it on a good finish than expensive tools. So your woodworking projects don't look amateur because you don't have expensive tools. They look amateur because maybe you haven't learned to use the tools that you already have. Make sure you learn how to use them, make sure they're well maintained, make sure they're adjusted, and you'd be shocked at how good your projects would turn out. You can make some amazing projects with very little. Now I'd like to ask you guys, what part of woodworking makes your projects look less polished than you want? What part do you struggle the most with? Sanding, finishing, tool setup, measuring? Let me know in the comments. And if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.